The church. We arrived at the ancient church in the village, our last hope for a place to spend the night. Gustav got off the carriage and walked toward the rusty iron door of the church, clapping his hands. He didn't forget to point at an iron cross planted in the ice in front of the door, then gave me a look that clearly said, "You were right about what you noticed." A few minutes later, a lantern's light flickered inside, and the rusty door slowly opened, revealing a wrinkled face. It was the priest. His white beard and thick eyeglasses reminded me of the Romanian Orthodox priests I had known in Alexandria. Gustav spoke to him briefly, and the priest shook his head in disapproval, then gestured for us to come in. I shut the car door behind me and leapt inside, shivering from the cold. We climbed worn-out steps to a spacious room, and there it was, the precious red flame of a fireplace dancing as if to welcome us. An elderly woman was sitting by the fire, knitting. The priest introduced her with some words I didn't understand. Gustav said, "Miss Antonescu, the priest's sister." There were a few prayer books on an old wooden table, 2 candle holders and several icons. The room was old but clean, cosy and warm. We sat by the fire, feeling the heat penetrate our bones, melting the marrow inside them. As for Father Antonescu, he got up and fetched a small bottle, pouring something into 2 ceramic cups. He handed one to Gustav and one to me. I looked at Gustav questioningly, and he said, "Hot rum, to get your blood flowing." I declined and handed him the cup to drink in my place, while he explained to the priest, "Muslim." He said it in Romanian, just as we pronounce it in Arabic. The priest looked at him kindly. "Aha, Muslim." A brief conversation followed, and of course I understood its essence. Where did I come from? How did I end up in this cursed corner of the world, in this freezing cold, while my homeland is among the warmest and most beautiful places on earth? If I spoke Romanian, I would have told him, "I am mad, kind man, mad and foolish, and I am seeking my own end." The old lady returned gently, carrying a steaming pot with a fragrant aroma, 2 long loaves of bread, and a plate with some slices of meat. The priest pointed at the meat and said something that didn't require much effort for me to understand. Gustav said, "He's telling you this meat is lamb, not pork, right?" How did you know? The language of gestures and glances is universal, my friend. If you ever watched a film in Bengali, you'd understand 80% of its story without any effort. At the table, we sat sipping the soup. I had no idea what it was, though after tasting it, I leaned toward believing it was shoe soup. Floating in it were terrifying things. But it was hot, and that was enough. Meanwhile, Gustav and the priest were engaged in a conversation I couldn't understand a word of. A torrent of sh and cake sounds poured over my head, as if threatening to blow the entire table away. Is Romanian really that harsh a language? The priest's eyes widened behind his glasses as he stressed every consonant, and Gustav looked skeptical, though he had stopped chewing, which told me the matter had piqued his interest to some extent. The priest then made the sign of the cross. "What are you 2 talking about, Gustav?" He looked at me mockingly, then said, "Guess! Aren't you an expert in Bengali films?" Gestures, my friend, gestures. All right, enough joking. There's some belief the priest holds and fears deeply, but you don't believe it, although it seems the story is starting to affect you. Okay, you're right. And to be more specific, he's saying that the devil, or an evil spirit, or something of that sort, is roaming the village on this cursed night. That's why the villagers locked their doors and planted crosses on them. And he's praying to the Lord to protect us tonight. He looked at me doubtfully and asked, "Didn't you say you don't speak a word of Romanian?" "I really don't. But it's the gestures, like I told you. Besides, it's always the same story. I learned that from the tales of Edgar Allan Poe." "And did you also pick up from the gestures that it ripped 2 men apart last night?" "Who did?" "Belasco the Mad, or in other words, the sin that used to be a man." Horror in the village. I cried out in shock. Are you talking about the legend of the man who turns into a wolf when the moon is full?" He replied with a triumphant tone, having finally piqued my curiosity. "Romania is the homeland of that legend, more precisely the Danube Plain, and to be geographically exact, it seems this village is its birthplace, unfortunately." Then he took another spoonful of his soup and motioned for me to continue eating. but what I had already eaten had turned into a brick in my stomach. Another myth chasing me in this forgotten corner of the world, as if I were the only one qualified for these filthy missions. But the moon had been full last night. According to the legend, the village should be calm and peaceful now, after the chaos of the full moon night. The madman should have returned to being human. Gustav exchanged a few words with Father Antonescu, then turned to me. 3 days. So the madman roams and wreaks havoc in the village for 3 whole days. That's too long, which means tomorrow night is the final night of the cycle. I think so. I resumed finishing my soup while the conversation between Gustav and the priest continued. I turned to Gustav and said, "You told the priest you don't believe a word of it." "Gustav, that's not appropriate. Those are his personal beliefs. And he's inviting you to visit the church early tomorrow to hear what the men there will say. But apologize to him. I didn't mean to offend. You're just so." They went back to talking again, and I heard the word tos phosphoratu mentioned several times. Then Gustav pointed at the priest, laughing. "He's asking you about your adventure with Count Dracula." I looked at him with irritation and said, "Tell him I got terrifyingly close to the story, but to this very moment I'm not sure of anything. It could all be a chain of delusions or a cruel joke I swallowed whole, but I do know one thing. I found no physical evidence that a vampire has ever lived or exists in this world, and my stance on myths hasn't and won't ever change. Anything that can't be seen, heard, smelled or reasoned with doesn't exist. That's my opinion on the Dracula legend." Gustav corrected me. "Nosferatu, that's what they prefer to call him here, and in Poland and Hungary too." "Yes, they're right. It does sound a bit more endearing." They went back to talking for another 10 minutes. Then Gustav turned to me and said, "The priest says you're wrong." What a poetic language. It would probably take me 2 hours just to say good evening. I yawned, and the priest said something to the old lady. She immediately got up, holding a kerosene lamp, and slowly led us to a small room with 2 clean beds. She said something which was, no doubt, good evening in Romanian. We collapsed onto the beds in our clothes, since our bags were still in the car, and neither of us was willing to step back into the freezing darkness just to put on pajamas. I sank into a deep sleep. Strange is the howling of wolves in this village. A strong, raspy, painful sound, like a person suffering in the depths of hell. It woke me 3 times after midnight. Each time I recited Ayat al-Kursi and went back to sleep, imagining that wretched creature, that cursed being, wandering through the darkness and snow, hunting for prey. In the morning, Gustav and I went out to walk through the village. The first task was to find what the car needed to continue the journey. The second was to go to the tavern, as the priest had said. We might find something important there, for me or for Gustav. At the village garage, Gustav approached a fat man soaked in sweat and grease, yelling loudly. My friend spoke to him, but the man just kept yelling. Then Gustav came back to me, and I said with a smile, "Everyone in this village yells and refuses your requests." He replied sternly, "This isn't a joke. He says the snow blocks have sealed all the roads, and the only telephone line is cut. They haven't been able to call in the snowplows." Which means, yes, exactly, it means we're prisoners in this village until the ice melts. At the tavern, Gustav ordered some rum for himself and coffee for me, and we sat amidst a sea of thick Slavic moustaches and suspicious stares. Muscular men made even bulkier by the fur coats they wore, and nearly all of them were armed with massive old rifles. They were all shepherds, living a life so rugged it defied description. And now they found themselves face to face with 2 delicate fellows like you and me. Gustav said that while sipping his drink, as I shrank into my seat in the midst of this unwelcoming atmosphere, the tavern owner approached us, and Gustav pulled out a handful of 4-lei bills and shoved them into his hand, saying something. Suddenly, the men's faces lit up with joy, and they began gulping down their rum in terrifying merriment. It was that old trick, drinks for everyone on me. And just like that, all hostility and human barriers dissolved in seconds. A strong man came over, dragged a chair to our table and shook my and Gustav's hands with a grip that nearly crushed our fingers. He said Esteban Hershevich, Gustav Nicolescu, Rafat Ismail. Gustav asked him something in Romanian. The man started thinking, then began telling a long, horrifying story, groaning from time to time. Then he shouted emotionally, and Gustav put an arm around his shoulder and said, he lost his friend the day before yesterday. His friend suddenly remembered he hadn't locked the sheep pen, so he left his wife and 2 children and went out into the darkness. Just a few seconds, but that was enough. His wife heard a terrible scream, and when she ran out armed to see what had happened, she found her husband torn to pieces on the ground. Next to him were the footprints of the possessed one. And the other? It was the village idiot, Constantine. And what about last night? Nothing, as far as he knows. We were the candidates for this honor if the priest hadn't hosted us. I shouted angrily. So they left us out there. Those cowards didn't open their doors, hoping we'd be a guaranteed dinner for our dear friend Belasco. What brilliant strategy. Gustav spoke with the shepherd again, then turned to me and said, he says no one opened their doors for us because the possessed one can sometimes speak in a human voice, giving convincing excuses. In his opinion, Father Antoniescu committed a crime against himself and his sister by letting us into his house last night. I downed the rest of my coffee, then asked, ask him who this possessed one is. Do they know him? He says if they knew, they'd kill him, but he's definitely one of them, and they've killed many before him. What? There have been many. Of course, there's always one. The legend says that whoever is wounded by the possessed one will turn into another possessed one the following month. It's like a plague. If you kill the first victim, the second victim remains. And when you kill him, the world will be cursed with a third. And so it goes, a long chain from the Middle Ages to the Day of Judgment. How do they kill the possessed one? It requires driving a silver blade into his heart, of course, while he's in his human form because, in his wolf form, he is at his strongest. He could easily uproot a tree from the ground. How do they know it's him when he's in his human form? They started talking again, and Esteban pointed to a man dressed in rough clothes with a bald head. The man approached, and Esteban asked him something. The man pulled out a bundle from his coat and threw it on the table, eyeing me suspiciously. Esteban says everyone in the village knows that if they're attacked by the possessed one, they should try to wound him in some way. If they survive, then we start looking for the person who has that wound, and he will be executed with a silver blade. And this bundle. This man is called Ado. He was attacked by the possessed one last month in the woods. He managed to rip a claw off of him before escaping. In the morning, he found something else in his pocket instead of the claw. Something like chocolate, perhaps? Esteban slowly unwrapped the bundle. It was a withered finger, a human finger, with a ring set with a blue gemstone. Ido didn't need to search very hard for who had lost their finger in the village. In fact, he didn't even have to leave his house. This ring was his wife's. Ekaterina. I gasped in shock. Oh my God. Goose swallowed hard. This is what they say. I don't believe it, but their story is terrifyingly well plotted, I said, frustrated. Of course, he killed his wife with a silver blade. Of course, he replied. And so any murderer could kill his wife, cut off her finger, and then run through the village claiming he discovered she was possessed and that he executed the punishment of heaven on her. Instinctively turned to the 2 men to relay my opinion, and I shouted, "No, you fool. We won't leave here alive." He stopped speaking, but the 2 men must have guessed what I said, or nearly did. Damn this language of gestures. I saw a flash of anger in his eyes, and I felt his dirty hand reach for the hilt of the dagger hanging from his belt. I commend your enthusiasm for translating. Try to change the subject. And Esteban began speaking again in his deep, rough voice, while Ido folded the bundle and stuffed it back into his pocket, casting me a fiery glare. Goose continued. A year ago, Stefano succeeded in cutting off the limb of a possessed man with an axe. In the morning, the clawed, hairy leg turned into a human leg. That same day, they found the mayor's son had lost his leg in an accident. Of course, his father executed the judgment himself. How horrendous. The new possessed one, Belasco, no one has been able to identify him or even wound him yet. At that moment, my eyes fell upon the most beautiful sight I had ever seen in my life. Words could not express the effect this beauty had on my soul. I needed a more delicate, more beautiful language, perhaps music. A girl with black eyes, black hair, and dark clothes stood beside Esteban and looked at me with a steady gaze that melted me with embarrassment. She said something to Esteban, who answered her roughly, "What a jerk," said something else, looking disgusted. Said, "She's Etrina, the innkeeper's daughter. She says she wants to tell you something, but Esteban scolded her and told her that women should be silent when men speak." The monster. Then I thought for a moment, and an idea struck me. "Gusf, tell me, of course this inn has a place to sleep. Of course, like every filthy inn in the world. Then tell the innkeeper that we would like to stay the night here. But why? There's the inn and the church. No, I want to stay here. Has your mouth watered at the sight of the first girl in the village? She isn't." I never claimed that for a moment. I just want to be near her tonight. The night of the cursed transformation. Oh, what romance, how fiery your Mediterranean hearts are. He called the innkeeper and told him of my request. The innkeeper nodded in welcome and gestured for me to follow him up a rickety wooden staircase to the dirtiest room I had ever seen in my life. It was the epitome of misery, poverty, and degradation. Even the bathroom was just a rusty bucket beside the bed, which wasn't much better. And now listen, my friend, Rifat. I know what you're going to say. You go and sleep in the inn, and I'll stay. You've found your fate. He said it while spitting on the ground, which, to be honest, his spit didn't make any dirtier. He turned to ask me one last question at the door. What about the translation? Then he shook his head, adding, I forgot the language of gestures and glances, and closed the door before I could respond appropriately to his rudeness. I sat on the bed and looked around in disgust. Am I really that much of a teenager? Or was there some hidden motive that made me do what I did? The door knocked, and my heart leaped into my throat. I imagined her slender, sensitive, cold hand knocking on the door to say something in Romanian that would kill me. I opened the door eagerly and found the fat innkeeper laughing at me, showing his decayed teeth. The weakest smile he could muster. I seek refuge in God. He handed me a torn towel and a soap stained with grease, then bowed to imply the service was excellent, and left. It was crystal clear that he was the one who would be taking care of me in this room. It was now 2 p.m. There was no point in wasting the entire day in this pigsty. I decided to catch up with Gusf in the downstairs tavern to figure out what to do for the rest of the day. The door knocked again. Surely, the scoundrel was going to give me a favel or something for lunch. I went to the door and opened it, only to find Ekaterina. But tell me, can anything be more beautiful or pure than this? I went crazy. I say, am I dreaming, or is she speaking English? Poor English, actually, but understandable. You, the wolf, do you care? I do. It occurred to me, I don't know why, that she might understand me better if I spoke broken English. It's a reflex we sometimes have, even in Arabic, when someone speaks our language. The sin, it's here. Where? In this tavern.